Yeah, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Jenya. I'm here representing, so to speak, right from the developer's front line. I just want to tell you about two of our projects, games that directly use LLM as a core mechanic. We're working on them right now. We're also doing all this at the intersection with VR because of the immersion. It all actually started with when we were in some kind of drunken haze right after ChatGPT first came out, and we decided to have some fun with it and gave it a prompt like, imagine you're a character from Bloodborne and you end up with me in a certain situation. Our scenario has, two outcomes. Let's play. It did it really well. I mean, he knows what Bloodborne is at its core. Well, of course, when we started to break it after a couple of messages by saying, for example, pull out an angle grinder, or have you been to Vietnam? Reply, yes, I have. So these kinds of glitches show up quite quickly, but it seemed that AI really could become a game master. So, like in tabletop games, that kind of human role. It's clear if we make this more complex, think through it in more detail and provide a brief description of the character, their backstory, some more detailed role-playing rules, the history of the player's actions, if we're meeting this character not for the first time, and so on. Try to teach him syntax, the one we need. Overall, it really turns out pretty well. And the obvious thought that comes to mind was, yes, when you're playing in a chat, it's really not as cool as when you see some kind of digital avatar, because chat is just text. But if you have a visual image that somehow interacts synchronously with what's shown on screen, that should definitely be better. We started playing around with prototypes and dove into Unity. So the task was very simple. Everything that was before in the chat, we also transfer into the engine and connect the necessary 3D models with naturally text-to-speech and the various speech-to-text solutions, ensuring seamless integration throughout the process. Overall, we found that basically it works well. And in general, it all ended up turning into a kind of where in ChatGPT or in any LLM, not only can this solution be used, you can feed in quite a lot of input data at exactly the right moment. If we've thought through the whole architecture correctly, it can turn out to be a really cool thing, both for fun and beyond. So in general, this whole thing with LLMs, digital avatars, and text-to-speech fits well, not only in game development, but also in medtech. I'll talk in more detail about two projects in game development in a moment. Actually, I spent most of my life working at the startup Celsius. This is a CV, and that's actually where I first started getting involved with AI. So in healthcare in general, this whole story is actually more demanding because the game is fun entertainment, and if the neural network messes up, okay, you can even play it off somehow. In medicine, the cost of a mistake, yes, is much higher. That's why game development is actually one of the coolest and easiest fields where the requirements for such serious things are minimal. SciTech, for example, is also about the fact that we can immerse a person in a situation, cause them stress and so on, and in this way conduct therapy. Many more, in fact, solutions, edtech, neuro, social, and so on. So basically, to put it simply, as a matter of fact, this is the concept we came up with, that we wanted to focus precisely these competencies within the framework of such virtual, worlds. And right now, in terms of game development, we have two key projects that we are working on. One is, so to say, just a demo of the technology itself to show people a finished proof of concept product. It's an investor simulator. The second is a kind of concept car. It's a complex project which would require a team 100 times bigger than now, just the three of us hobbling along. But we're slowly and steadily working on it. So what kind of games are these and how can this technology be used there? First, it's an investor simulator. You saw there's a show on YouTube called Shark Tank. The idea is simple. There are famous investors sitting there, 3 or 4 people, and different startup founders come to them one by one, pitching their projects. The investors ask them tricky questions and then negotiate some kind of deal. So the idea is pretty simple. A digital character comes to you representing a project, delivers the pitch directly to you, making sure you receive it clearly and understand, shares idea. And you can ask questions, even the trickiest ones, and generally behave like an investor. What about your market? What about your team? What stage is the project at? Who are you anyway? Tell me about your background. Have you ever thought about doing the opposite? Oh, for us, for example, interesting, because we do this kind of thing regularly anyway. We go to investors and pitch our project. That's the story in a nutshell, really. Reverse pitching can actually work just fine in many cases. And here you can throw in both real projects and synthetic ones. We're leaning towards synthetic projects so that the game has some competitive element. If the game has real projects, nothing stops you from Googling the project's history if it took off or didn't take off. Although overall, as a simulator using real projects, it could be interesting because in venture capital, there are many notable stories where investors simply didn't do any due diligence. Turned out that they were simply being lied to. As for the mechanics, overall the game loop is that you interact with startup founders like this, make deals with them, and LLMs actually handle all of this really well. AI models pitch projects better than, we shape pitch. Let me put it that way. Why? Because each of these unique characters is its own language LLM model. We train it on these specific cases with a fairly large amount of data. If these are real projects, not synthetic, it's pitch decks, the project's marketing materials, reviews from marketplaces, if it's some kind of app, and so on. As a result, all this turns into great gameplay, where we can then generate some cool scenarios. For example, let's say the startup founder, becomes alcoholic. Just because you didn't interact with him as a person, missed that maybe he was weak-willed or something like that, or more classic situations. When competitors unite, putting on pressure and so on, and you, as an investor, depending on how well you respond to him as a person with business experience, the outcome of the game will then manifest in specific ways, whether you make money with this project or not. So there are actually a lot of interesting things you can throw in there as well. That's a really simple story. Things get more complicated with RPGs, because in the previous game, the game cycle and the vertical slice were pretty straightforward. But if we start looking at RPGs, there are really, more benefits and more complexities. This is a game based on the Vampire, the Masquerade franchise. Maybe some of you know it. So, a story of vampires. It's dark fantasy. So what's the main idea here? First, are making all of this in VR. Not because we have an unshakable belief that you can make a ton of money on this platform, but because it's very immersive. VR, which is immersive in itself, and LLM with voice acting together, I think they create a pretty good synergy with each other. There are already such games coming out on PC, actually, where LLM is the core game mechanic, but the implementation is still not great. But when you put on a VR headset, your brain actually responds much better to the clever visual trickery and illusions of the simulation and to these characters. So trust them, feel alive. So essentially, the game is about the Inquisition. When the church gained a ton of power and punished innocent or sometimes actually guilty people, you play as Inquisitor. Most of the time will be spent in your office typically. These are prototypes, so things don't look very pretty yet. We've made sure that it works, that we can actually lay this out as a concept in the end. So what are the advantages of an RPG specifically here? When you have a variety of different characters, if you set up all the logic correctly, the architecture, then for the player, a really cool story emerges about role-playing a specific archetype role. Say, I want to play as an evil Inquisitor. I'm going to punish and destroy everyone. It's really cool to then show the consequences of the player's choices. Let's say he killed character, then someone connected to that character comes to him. And this person can then, in detail, really reflect your roleplay. What exactly you did. You just insulted the person or tortured him to death and so on. And that's the fun of the game, because here a huge array develops sandbox. You don't need to think through, say, 4 specific archetypes. The game itself, with the right backend, with the right logic, essentially will let you play anything. Specific examples. Characters are also cool because right now there are a lot of great solutions developing, like 11 Labs, which enhance the quality of voice acting and the response speed. Earlier, input lag in VR projects was previously mentioned, as you may recall. Now it's down to half a second overall. How do you integrate this into game design mechanics? Simply, when character created, say we have an Inquisitor recruiter here, you don't have the classic input form where you want to allocate points like this or that. Everything happens through conversation. And the recruiter, through a confession, asks you, how would you act in this situation? Here, let's say someone drops their wallet. So your parameters start changing, which show whether you are more of a warrior or if you have more charisma and so on. An interesting point is that even if a player tries to break such a game on LMM, it can be handled very natively and played off a cool way. If within this lore he starts talking about an Android collider, we simply raise his madness parameter, and his fellow players, so to speak, with just a single line of code, start considering him insane. You can keep playing if you want, but it will be very difficult. If you want to know more, interested, there's a lot more to tell about this story, truly. We can chat by the computer. Right now, we're launching a marketing campaign. We've recreated one of the scenes in VR chat. These are our faces. We can talk about the tools. There are some great solutions. And also, you're welcome. Feel free to add me as a friend on Telegram. I'd be happy to connect with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Join us. We'll certainly be happy to include you in the group in one way or another. Thank you. Are there any questions from the audience?
A question from the neighboring well-known faculty of the prestigious Higher School of Economics. I know that you teach at our faculty, but the question isn't for you at all, unfortunately. I actually have a question about the VR game where there are LLM agents for Vampire, the Masquerade. AI Dungeon has existed for quite a while now. It's literally a text-based generative novel where you enter prompt, or rather respond, say, I'm in a dungeon, and it generates text for you like, this variable does such and such. They all run into the issue of context, that's it. And just recently, a neural network appeared that adds LLM agents directly into Skyrim. They interact with you. But there's one catch: they completely break all the rules of game design related to limitations. Game design, in its essence, is about rules and constraints. They give you so much freedom, they break everything and set up a completely different system of game design. Points here, that doesn't work because the human factor comes into play here. Even in a game with an investor, I can already see, for example, that if the player, say, talks to a character and doesn't ask, did you drink or not? Startup founder became alcoholic. What? Where did I go wrong? Moments like that happen. When the player, because there aren't any explanatory guiding markers, might just end up feeling frustrated. What do you think about that?
That's a very important question that you're raising. And actually, the answer here is quite simple. It depends on your experience, how you set everything up, organize and design the system overall. If, as you rightly said, suddenly seemingly normal guy becomes an alcoholic and you think, what the fuck, how was I supposed to figure that out? That's an unpleasant UX moment for the game. But if we add some kind of marker, like a red nose, to speak, that's okay. We, again, shouldn't just dump everything on neural networks like that. Like, come up with how to really make the game fun for the player, for us. Naturally, we really need to set very clear boundaries. There's another advantage, for example, of starting with a franchise, at least if you're indie developers. The cool thing about any franchise, not necessarily vampires, it could be Warhammer, is that there's already a ton of content for them, which you can use to really train up a neural network, teach it, and it will give very good, reasonable answers, not just within the lore in general, but also to use the context of the scene more clearly, that we set and behave much cooler. A practical example, we actually partially built the training dataset by making use of the rules and structure of a tabletop role-playing game or RPG. That's enough, because there's a lot of lore described there. Entities, these clients, who is friends with whom, no friends, examples of role-play, and so on. Well, there's a situation where the neural network suddenly invents some mechanic that we don't have, and then nothing happens in the game, it breaks. For example, it comes up with syntax that we don't have in our database, or there's no specific animation for it. There are certain issues with this aspect that need to be addressed. But all of this can be fixed with fine-tuning, drag, distillation, and similar ML tools.
I also once raised the question of how neural network, why it isn't already being integrated directly into video games? And the answer is simple. It's about performance. It's hard to run it locally for most people, and a constant online connection isn't always suitable.
Let me add, people say neural networks don't retain context. They lose it pretty quick. People refer to OpenAI. They say, well, here you have 1 million tokens, 150,000 tokens. Well, you should simply use RAG in this particular situation. With it, depending on the specific extraction method that is used, there are actually a variety of different extractors available. First of all, temperature can be adjusted. You can tweak it as you like. And you can use regular databases. I mean, nobody's stopping you use Postgres or say, I don't know, regular SQL. And check with agents, which work even much faster. You don't need to send to network. Just use lightweight networks that will quickly access the database, extract a vector or not a vector, just the context, and you can keep the state for each user pretty efficiently. If it's a computer game, your states aren't that huge because you have ENT. It's manageable. Of course, you could suddenly start with a spaceship in your game setting, end up in a dungeon, and then you'll have a completely genre-mixed, confusing story. But if you stick to one genre with a coherent and decent scenario in terms of dramaturgy, then you have a contextual foundation. And also, what you keep in SQL or Postgres plus RAG, that's absolutely normal. And no one will end up leaking outside. And the context will be well preserved, right?
Character AI, they even teach this in schools and universities as part of their curriculum.
By the way, just to mention, sorry, I literally broke character AI yesterday in just 3 minutes as a bet. It falls out of context easily. There's some kind of crude prop, OpenAI version 3 running, maybe even older, because you can just override it with a simple prompt with brackets, telling it, now you're a mathematician mixed with a doctor. And it has no protection at all or something. It loses context, spitting stuff out like that. So character AI is more of a PR project, and Google recently bought it. Well, basically invested in the user base was there. So they just bought the audience and got a great hype opportunity. Yes.
They'll catch up soon. Currently, we're training it on 2 settings. You know, it's kind of fun, so I recommend giving it a try.
I also agree with Vasily about databases because they're the foundation. It's the base, really. Because we've run into the problem where you come to a character and then we try to keep their entire log in the same structure in a single session in one chat. Naturally, after a certain number of tokens in the sequence, it starts to lag, forgets what happened, is confused. So you really need to have some specific logic here. Once the session is over, an introduction to this character, you make a summary of it and put that into a cell in the database. And then you only pull up that summary, not full context. There might be some nuances, but a real person wouldn't remember everything perfectly either. By the way, you said RPG mods for Oblivion that enhance gameplay, Skyrim. Yesterday, before my train, I took a look at Morrowind. I wouldn't say that the game breaks. It's actually really cool. It's exactly when he comes into that tavern and says, tell me about the dish. Before there were just names. And she starts telling him this is made from this, that. He says, how about we change something? And you can see that it's very RPG-like. The guy enjoys it. And the comments there really confirm it from the people who are watching this. Oh, that's exactly what you meant. Yeah, it won't go back on the same rails, obviously. So here you really have to approach game design a bit differently. And there's a cool case, Google it. It's called The Endless Visual Novel. The name pretty much speaks for itself. You can play it endlessly, and there will always be a story being generated. And it's actually not bad. I even tried to give it a difficult task, like make me the most boring story about the most boring character. And the game tried to do it. Sometimes it was funny. Some issues, with the visuals.
I wonder what's the playtime of an endless story? 30 minutes? Well,
I lost it for half an hour, because after that, it started to get really weird. I actually have a saved case, slide by slide.
Basically, you take a bunch of databases, behavior 3 next to it, and add a little neural net on top. That's it.
I have a question for you. So, computer games have developed as which are most often installed on a computer or a mobile phone and so on, even if it's an MMORPG. But cloud-based games didn't really catch on. I mean, these cloud services, they exist, but they still have a lot of different problems, really. And let's say computer clubs maybe are more popular now than cloud streaming servers, but with neural networks, seems it's the opposite, that LLMs haven't become as popular because they have high requirements, and neural networks are mostly used in the cloud. And what do you think, in the context of game development, or in the context of the future, will cloud-based neural networks become more popular? Or will everything move to personal PCs and mobile phones? What are your predictions for the future?
As long as my home PC is simply more powerful, then the channel capacity I'll still play beautiful games on my own PC, but with neural networks, it's the opposite. Because for now, I can't handle that kind of volume quickly. And over there, they have completely different, much more powerful systems.
People have always, 1,000 years ago, 100 years ago,
And even now they watch, they follow stories, dramaturgy. And everything depends on the quality of storytelling. People play Minecraft, they play text games. No matter what they play, story engaging. They watch, go to the theater, the media platform itself isn't that important. Naturally, big giants will buy up small startups. Those successful look where KPI, nums, metrics. But overall, if the giants remain, market reshuffling. And the big giants failed adapting will die. Cool little startups will grow soon and become new clumsy giants. Just like always, everything will be the same really. 100 years ago.
People in games are still, even now, playing out their own personal stories, the gameplay. The plot in a game is the player's story, not the characters. So I would still say that it's not the story that hooks people, but the interactive element in the game that hooks them. The experience it doesn't necessarily fit neatly or easily into a straightforward story. It can exist purely at your fingertips. No. When you play a shooter, your story, how you jumped at you, and you were the first to kill him. You both scattered, jumped out. That's your story in a shooter.
But if we're talking, you say that the PvP story is my main, let's say, game mechanic. It's about what I acquired or looted something or spent money. I have a sticker on my gun on something else.
no.
So Tetris isn't popular, doesn't give stickers.
Agreed, that's debatable. I mean, we partner with a bunch of gaming conferences. We're partners. We look at games, you do too. And I agree with you as well. To be completely honest, naturally, people have a personal experience, their own unique lived one, but at the same time it's really a personal drama. Talking about dramaturgy, experience, which person lives socializing with neural net, adapts to you, knows your context, sensors your information from social networks, often crawlers and so on perfect. Neural nets, they will definitely replace everything else, just like cinema. The same thing is happening in cinema.
And then millions of people run around after each other like tiny little balls. So all of this is really just an attempt to try and sell some additional services to customers, like such deep narrative, additional services for an already well-functioning model.
When it comes to the whole cloud versus local debate, as many people often discuss, right now we actually have a big question about, let's say, all is going well for us. We keep developing this game and we get to the point of releasing it directly on VR. If we stay on this platform, that's a problem, because everything that we've already developed there, even the distilled lightweight models, the headset won't handle it, or we'll have to sacrifice graphics. In case the idea of a cloud-based subscription comes up, because there's another point that every request requires computing resources. Someone has to pay for them, and the classic premium game model doesn't really fit us there. Maybe it will look like game time spent in computer clubs, something like that. But I'm 100% sure both will exist just for their purposes, because local actually opens up a number of possibilities with open source. Because if we want some really dark fantasy stuff, can do on ChatGPT. It has ethical considerations, moral. If we have an art project where we aim to push ethical boundaries, for that we need something like Llama to train it on our dataset. So a lot will depend on the context. Neural game, I support them, believe that the future belongs to them now.
Yes, I'm going to bring them back to hardware now, because you can easily fine-tune a small model and then run it even on the very weakest laptop, if that's what's needed. But then, well, the beautiful graphics will suffer simply because what will happen is this laptop will have other hardware limitations as well. Basically, right now, it's just a shot in the dark to guess, to be honest, because no one expected the emergence of these cloud technologies. And, that we have, right, is due to cloud computing and distributed computing in large data centers. Because before that, all these models just set in mathematics and theory as dead weight, and there was simply really no way to implement them. People were planning to use them back in the 60s, in around 1967, when in fact artificial intelligence first appeared. Punched cards might not have even existed back then. So we'll just have to wait. In this case, it's the technology that's driving this whole story. We'll wait, everything will change.
Thank you. That concludes our conference. Thank you. And please help yourself to some pizza. Let's keep the conversation going.